A poor single Omega sent a letter to the Ruthless Alpha by mistake, asking for coins for her sick pup. What happened next? In a world ruled by the unforgiving law of the pack, a desperate Omega sends a letter for help, and it lands in the hands of a ruthless Alpha who should never care. Her plea is simple: a few coins for a sick pup. But what begins as a misdelivered message spirals into a dangerous game of pride, trust, and desire. Chapter 1. A Hall of Shadows. The morning mist clung to the ramparts like a hesitant ghost, curling around the gray stone walls of my hall. I stood atop the highest tower, my eyes sweeping the courtyard where the pack gathered. Every movement, every murmur, every shift of posture told me where loyalty lay, and where it didn't. Authority had to be absolute. I had learned that early. Weakness, once spotted, spread like wildfire. I had built my reputation on ruthlessness, on an unflinching will that demanded obedience. I did not tolerate softness, not in my pack, not in myself. Sentimentality was a luxury I could not afford, a dangerous crack in the armor that kept my world orderly. My father had been merciless, and the scars of his lessons still guided my steps. I trusted no one, allowed no attachments, and yet, the quiet of the morning brought a whisper of disquiet, though I would never admit it. A messenger approached, hurried but careful. In his hand, a small, sealed envelope bore no markings I recognized. My brow arched in mild irritation. Strangers, misdeliveries, and mistakes were the bane of my mornings. I took the envelope with the faintest snap of my fingers, breaking the wax seal. The handwriting inside was hesitant, small, and careful. I glanced over the words, expecting some mundane plea or trivial request from a subordinate. Instead, it was a message of need, raw and simple. A poor Omega unknown to me, asking for a few coins to ease the weight of her burdens. My first instinct was dismissal. I had no obligation to her. Why should I concern myself with a stranger's troubles? And yet, a strange curiosity prickled at the edge of my mind. Her words carried a tone of bravery beneath humility, a quiet courage that was unfamiliar. I hated that it tugged at me, that my control wavered in the presence of something or someone I could not fully dominate. I studied the letter again. The seal, the careful script, the modest request. It was all too deliberate to be meaningless. And so, instead of discarding it, I tucked it into my coat pocket. I would watch, from a distance, and see what this Omega would do with the world she had. Perhaps it would amuse me. Perhaps it would prove a lesson in folly. I turned away from the courtyard, letting the morning chill bite at my face. Even as I walked back toward the warmth of the hall, my mind lingered on her words. They were small, insignificant in the grand scale of pack politics, but they had found their way into my thoughts. A faint smile, the smallest crack in my otherwise unyielding demeanor, threatened to show itself. I suppressed it. Curiosity was dangerous, attachment was worse, and yet, I wondered, just briefly, who she was. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Plea. The hall was quiet, the servants moving like shadows across the stone floor, and yet I could not focus on the order and routine I so carefully maintained. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope tucked inside my coat, a small weight that seemed to pulse with quiet insistence. Normally, I would have discarded such distractions without a second thought. Yet hers. Her words lingered. I read them again, aloud in my mind, savoring the simplicity. She did not ask for grandeur, nor did she beg with melodrama. She asked for a coin, or two, perhaps enough to ease the discomfort of her daily struggle. And yet it was not the request itself that held me. It was the courage embedded in the lines. The nerve to reach out to a stranger, to someone like me, required a boldness I had seldom seen. I clenched my jaw, fighting the unusual stir in my chest. Curiosity was a dangerous thing for an alpha. It led to mistakes, to attachments, to weakness. I refused to entertain such thoughts, yet I could not. There was a rhythm to her words, a quiet strength that pricked at my pride, not in the challenge of her request, but in the undeniable fact that someone smaller, less powerful, dared to exist unbroken beneath my notice. And so I sat, leaning against the cold stone wall of my private chamber, contemplating the letter. Should I do nothing? That was the safest choice. Ignorance was a shield. Yet, for reasons I could not name, I found myself counting the coins in my purse, calculating how easy it would be to send a small sum. A small test, I told myself. A discreet gesture, barely noticeable, enough to satisfy curiosity without lowering my authority. I imagine her surprise when the gold arrives. Would she recognize my involvement? Or would she see only providence, chance, or luck? It did not matter. What mattered was her reaction, her resilience, and the subtle thrill of connection, however distant. Even now, I could not suppress the small amusement that crept at the edges of my pride. To be intrigued by a stranger, a mere omega, went against everything I had trained myself to value: control, strength, solitude. And yet, in this quiet moment, I felt something different, something that had no name, no easy definition. I folded the letter with careful precision, placing it atop my desk, and let my mind wander to her. Who was she? Where did she live? How did she carry herself under the weight of her small, quiet world? My pulse quickened at questions I had never permitted myself to ask about anyone before. The messenger had left. The hall returned to its ordered silence, and still I lingered, unwilling to return fully to the routine that had always governed my life. There was a spark here, small and fragile, yet persistent. A spark I could neither control nor fully understand. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I allowed myself the faintest hope that this spark might lead somewhere more than curiosity, perhaps even connection. Chapter 3: A Crack in the Armor. The morning light spilled across the stone floor of the hall, cold and unwavering, yet I felt a heat stirring within me that had no place there. I walked among my pack, observing, judging, enforcing, yet my mind refused to stay on the routine. It wandered, unbidden, to the small omega who had dared to reach across the distance of our worlds with nothing but words. Curiosity, I reminded myself, was dangerous. And yet, I found it impossible to resist. I sent a discreet coin through a servant, careful not to reveal my hand, a test of sorts. Would she accept it gracefully, or recoil at the attention of a stranger with power she did not understand? I imagined her fingers closing over the small, cold gold, the way her eyes might widen in cautious disbelief, and the thought stirred something unfamiliar in me. Later, from the shadowed edge of the courtyard, I watched the pack as they moved about their duties. Their laughter, their quarrels, their obedience, all the things I had learned to command and suppress. And yet I saw her among them, moving with careful grace, her head held high despite her obvious modesty. She did not cower. She did not plead. She simply existed, quietly strong. I felt my chest tighten in a way I had long since forbidden myself to notice. There was a pride in her I could not extinguish, a quiet courage that pricked at my control. I hated that it affected me, that the thought of her unsettled the order I prided myself on maintaining. And yet, I could not look away. I lingered longer than was wise, hidden among the shadows, watching her interaction with others. The subtle smile she offered a struggling child in the courtyard, the patient way she guided a younger pack member, these small acts, unnoticed by most, were impossible to ignore. They tugged at something inside me I had spent years burying: compassion, desire, the faintest longing for connection. And then she looked up, straight toward me. My eyes met hers for the briefest of moments, and I felt the shift. Not fear, not submission. Curiosity mirrored in her gaze. A silent acknowledgement that our paths had crossed for reasons neither of us yet understood. I stepped back into the shadows, forcing my expression into neutrality. Pride would not allow fascination to show. Curiosity would not become attachment. And yet the spark had been lit. I knew, even as I denied it, that I would not be able to ignore her again. As the day waned, I found myself alone in my chambers, the coins still in my pocket as a reminder. I allowed myself the briefest admission. She had captured my attention, uninvited and undesired though it was. And for the first time in years, I did not recoil from the feeling. I only let it simmer quietly, a dangerous warmth beneath the cold stone walls of my heart. Yes, she was an Omega. Yes, she was beneath me in the pack hierarchy. And yet, I wanted to know her in ways I would never admit aloud. Chapter 4. The Unexpected Reply. The letter arrived that morning, carried by a timid messenger whose eyes darted to me with all the caution of one accustomed to fearing my temper. I took it without ceremony, breaking the seal with a precision born of years of habit. Yet when I unfolded the parchment, I felt an unusual hesitation, as though even the simple act of reading could unsettle the careful equilibrium I maintained. Her handwriting danced across the page, messy in places, thoughtful in others. She had received my coin, she wrote, and her words were polite, yet infused with a warmth I did not expect. Gratitude, yes, but something more, a quiet curiosity, almost daring, like she was testing whether the giver was merely invisible hands or someone who truly saw her. I frowned, suppressing the flutter in my chest. The sensation was dangerous, a crack in the wall I had so carefully built around myself. Curiosity had been one thing. This was different. I felt the pull of her presence, distant yet unmistakable, as though her words were small sparks against the stone of my solitude. I set the letter on the desk in front of me and paced the length of the chamber. I reminded myself, as I often did, that attachments were weakness. She was an Omega, a creature of lesser rank and influence in the pack. I was the Alpha, and yet every instinct in me urged me to read her words again, to linger over them, to imagine her speaking them aloud. She did not know me, and yet she had written as though she did. There was bravery in that. There was trust. And I hated the fact that it affected me so profoundly. Pride told me to ignore it, to dismiss her, to continue my ordered, solitary existence. But pride had never felt this restless. I poured a cup of strong, bitter wine and sat in the shadows, staring at the parchment. I considered sending another coin, another discreet gesture, perhaps even a word of encouragement, though I loathed the idea of lowering myself in the eyes of the pack. But the thought of her reading another note from me, of her curiosity peeking through her cautious reserve, was intoxicating. I allowed myself a brief, guilty smile. This small exchange had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. She was cleverer than I had anticipated, and far braver than I would have expected from someone in her position. The more I thought of her, the more impossible it became to deny the rising interest, the subtle admiration that I could not, would not, acknowledge aloud. As the sun climbed higher, I made a decision. I would respond, not openly, not with grandeur, but with care. A message, simple and discreet, meant to keep her safe, meant to keep her close, without revealing how much she had already begun to occupy my thoughts. I did not know then that this small reply would mark the beginning of something I had long convinced myself I could never allow. The quiet unraveling of my solitude, the slow awakening of a heart I had sworn long ago to keep locked away. For the first time in a long while, I felt anticipation. And it was hers, an Omega I had never met, who had sparked it. Chapter 5. The First Meeting. I had told myself it would be a brief encounter, necessary, controlled, and strictly formal. Yet, as I approached the courtyard where she waited, my pulse betrayed me with a speed I had not felt in years. The letter had led me here, curiosity had led me here, and something deeper, something I dared not name, pulled me forward. She stood near the fountain, hands folded over her modest skirts, her posture upright despite the obvious poverty in her attire. I studied her from a distance, noting the quiet strength in the tilt of her chin, the steady gaze that met mine without faltering. She was smaller than I expected, yes, fragile in appearance, yet there was a fire within her that commanded respect in ways I had not anticipated. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, though I felt an unfamiliar flutter behind my ribs. I had practiced greetings enough to mask irritation or boredom, but this was something entirely different. Her eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and caution. "Good morning, Alpha," she replied, her tone polite yet daring. There was no fear, not the trembling, obedient fear I expected from most. Just awareness, and perhaps, just perhaps, curiosity. I handed her a small envelope, my discreet gift, a continuation of our quiet correspondence. Her fingers brushed mine as she took it, and I felt an echo of warmth that startled me. It was brief, fleeting, but enough to make my chest tighten and my control falter. I chastised myself silently. An alpha did not feel this way about someone so beneath him. "You sent this?" she asked, voice steady, a small smile playing at her lips. There was no accusation, no awe, just an acknowledgement that stirred something strange and unfamiliar within me. "I did," I admitted, briefly, controlled. I did not elaborate, did not offer an explanation or reason. Pride dictated silence. Yet inside, a part of me yearned to see her reaction, to hear her thoughts, to know the small nuances that letters could never convey. She examined the envelope with careful fingers, then looked up at me, her gaze searching. I felt exposed under it, uncomfortably so. Her eyes seemed to peer past my armor, past my pride, and see something I had long kept hidden, even from myself. You didn't have to," she said softly, almost to herself, yet directed at me. I wanted to say something clever, commanding and dismissive. Instead, I found myself nodding because there was no denying it. I had chosen to care, not because I had to, not because it served my authority, but because something about her had compelled me. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the courtyard, of her, of something unfamiliar and dangerous, something I could not control. And in that moment, I realized that my life, carefully constructed and rigorously controlled, had begun to shift. All because of a letter and a small, stubborn Omega standing before me. Chapter 6. Shadows and Observations. I lingered on the edge of the courtyard long after she had gone about her tasks. My pack moved around me, shadows flitting through the morning light, but my eyes followed only her. There was a rhythm to the way she carried herself, quiet, deliberate, aware of every step, every motion. She moved with a dignity that I could not have expected from someone so fragile in appearance, and yet she was far from fragile. I clenched my fists, reminding myself that fascination was a dangerous indulgence. Attachment would be fatal. I was an alpha. I did not care for those beneath me. And yet, the simple act of watching her filled me with a strange, unfamiliar warmth, one I could not name and would not admit. A scuffle near the outer gates drew my attention. A pack member had begun to berate a younger Omega, and I saw her hesitate before intervening, not forcefully, but with subtle words and a calm, steady presence. She did not shout. She did not demand respect. Yet, in her soft, unwavering way, she commanded it. I felt a tightness in my chest. Pride, mine, wrestled with admiration for hers. To interfere would be uncharacteristic, risky even, but to watch and do nothing felt wrong. I stepped forward, my shadow falling across the courtyard in a way that startled the offender into retreat. My presence alone demanded obedience, yet I allowed my gaze to linger on her. She looked up at me, eyes wide, and I could have sworn I saw the faintest flicker of recognition, of relief, perhaps even trust. I returned to my chambers, pacing the stone floor, and yet her image clung to my mind. The way she carried herself, the subtle courage, the quiet defiance, it all unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I despised that I felt protective. I despised that her mere presence could unbalance me so. That evening, I sent another coin, this time not as a test, but as a gift. I did not know why I felt compelled, but I could not ignore the small pull that urged me to act. The messenger left with the parcel, and I watched the hall empty, the shadows deepening in the corners where light dared not linger. I allowed myself one moment of reflection. She had entered my life without permission, without warning, and yet she had begun to carve a place into the walls I had so carefully built. Pride warned me to resist, to deny any sentiment, but the truth pressed hard against my chest. I cared. Not for obedience, not for gain, not for duty, for her. The thought was almost unbearable in its novelty. I had spent years believing attachment was a weakness, yet here, in the quiet shadows of my hall, I found that attachment could feel like fire. Dangerous, consuming, irresistible. And I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that I would not be able to resist her much longer. She was small, perhaps, and beneath me by all measures of the pack, but she had undone a part of me I had long considered unshakable. Something had begun, something slow and unrelenting, and for the first time in years I welcomed it. Chapter 7. A Glimpse of Strength. The morning sun had barely crested the ramparts when I found myself wandering near the market square, ostensibly to inspect the trade goods and ensure the pack's merchants were honest. In truth, my steps were guided by a different purpose entirely: to see her. She was there, as I had hoped, moving among the stalls with careful grace, her hands brushing over cloth, her eyes thoughtful. There was no hesitation in her movements, no timid shyness. She was deliberate, considerate, and remarkably self-assured. I watched as she offered a small smile to a child struggling to carry a basket. There was no grand gesture, no demand for recognition, only a quiet kindness that drew my gaze again and again. I clenched my jaw. She was beneath me, yes. An omega, simple and unassuming. And yet, every glance, every small act of courage or compassion chipped away at the fortress I had spent years constructing around myself. Pride and desire warred within me. I hated that I wanted to see her succeed, to watch her navigate the world with that quiet dignity. She paused, lifting her head as if sensing something. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded square. I felt the familiar tug of fascination, stronger now, almost unbearable in its intensity. She did not look afraid, nor overly impressed. She simply met my gaze, curious and unflinching. And in that moment I felt something I had not in years, an ache for connection, a longing for a bond I had long convinced myself I did not need. I lingered, hidden behind a stall, watching her. Each small action, her careful movements, her attentiveness to others, the faint smile she gave to the vendors, was a testament to a resilience I had rarely witnessed. It was intoxicating in a way I could not name. I hated the vulnerability it exposed in me, hated that I was beginning to care. When she finally left the square, I followed at a distance, unseen but attentive. I noted the rhythm of her steps, the way she paused to adjust the strap of her bag, the careful way she navigated uneven cobblestones. Each detail etched itself into my mind. I did not know why I remembered so much, only that I could not stop. Back in my hall, I stood at the edge of the ramparts, staring across the courtyard and toward the town, imagining her journey home. My chest ached in a way that was foreign, an unfamiliar, restless heat that made my control feel tenuous. I had long prided myself on discipline, on emotional distance, on the absolute control of my world. And yet, for the first time, I realized that someone could enter that world and unsettle it entirely, simply by existing with courage, kindness, and quiet strength. I poured a cup of wine, ignoring its bitterness, and allowed myself a rare indulgence, the thought of her. I imagined her laughter, the tilt of her head, the quiet confidence in her movements, and I hated myself a little for it. She was an omega. She was beneath me. And yet, I wanted her, not for status, not for control, not for vanity, for her. And that thought lingered, warm and dangerous, as the sun climbed higher over the stone ramparts. Chapter 8. Silent Protection. The courtyard was quiet, the mid-morning sun casting long shadows across the stone floors. I had no official reason to linger there, yet I found myself watching her again, as though drawn by an invisible thread. She moved among the younger pack members, offering guidance, correcting a misstep here, a gentle word there. The way she commanded respect without demanding it, it was infuriatingly admirable. I spotted him then, a subordinate known for his sharp tongue and careless cruelty, approaching her with the intent to mock. Pride and irritation flared within me, and before I could stop myself, I had crossed the distance between us in long, decisive strides. The man froze when my shadow fell across him, my gaze sharp, unwavering. "Leave her be," I said, voice low but firm. There was no room for argument. He stumbled back, muttering under his breath, but the warning in my tone was enough. She had turned at the sound, her expression a mix of surprise and something softer, gratitude perhaps, though she did not speak it aloud. I caught the faintest twitch of a smile on her lips before she returned to her work, unshaken, unbowed. That resilience? It gnawed at my pride, forcing me to admit, silently, that I cared. I lingered in the shadows, observing her from a distance as she continued, unafraid, unbothered. Every small action she took, every word she offered with quiet authority, reminded me of the stark contrast between her world and mine. My walls, my armor, all seemed unnecessary here, crumbling in the face of something pure and unassuming. Back in my chambers, I poured a cup of wine, yet I did not taste it. My mind replayed the encounter, the flash of fear in his eyes, the subtle calm in hers, the way she seemed to move through the world with courage that did not depend on me, yet somehow demanded my attention. I hated that I wanted to protect her. Not as an alpha commanding obedience, but as a man who felt the stirrings of something far more dangerous. Affection. Desire. A fragile, growing attachment I could neither control nor fully name. She had entered my ordered life like a silent storm, dismantling every notion of detachment I had spent years cultivating. I felt the pull of her presence, even when she was not near, and I hated that it unsettled me so completely. Yet, for all my pride, for all my insistence on control, I found myself planning, subtly, ways to ensure her safety. Not because it served me, not because it was expected, but because I could not bear the thought of her facing harm while I remained indifferent. And so I watched, unseen, silent, protective. A shadow among shadows, drawn to her light. For the first time, I realized that strength could take many forms. Hers was quiet, understated, yet it demanded notice. And I was drawn to it. The thought was dangerous, reckless, and entirely irresistible. Chapter 9. The First Test. The wind had shifted, carrying the sharp scent of the woods beyond the courtyard. I had been walking along the ramparts, restless, when a shout carried to my ears, a clamor that jarred the morning calm. My instincts sharpened instantly. The sound was her voice, tinged with surprise, maybe even annoyance, but tinged also with vulnerability. I moved like a shadow across the stones, swift and precise, until I reached the source, a few pack members surrounding her, their smirks careless, their intentions obvious. They did not see me at first, but I saw them. Every muscle in my body coiled with controlled tension. She faced them without fear, shoulders squared, eyes steady. And yet, she was alone. A solitary flame against the wind, fragile yet defiant. My chest tightened at the sight, and I knew with a clarity I could not deny. I would not allow them to touch her, not in words, not in deed. Enough, I said, my voice carrying across the stones like steel. It was calm, deliberate, but it did not invite argument. They froze, startled by the authority that I always commanded, but somehow even more formidable now, because it was fueled by something personal, protective, fierce. One of the men stepped forward, sneering. "She doesn't belong here," he said, but the challenge in his eyes faltered under my gaze. I took a step closer, my presence looming, my patience fraying like a taut rope. "She does," I replied, low and unwavering. Every syllable left no room for negotiation. "And you will respect that." They hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward mine, subtle acknowledgement, almost a whisper of gratitude in their gaze. It was enough. They withdrew, muttering under their breath, leaving her standing tall and unshaken. I approached her, careful not to overstep, careful to keep the distance that pride demanded, yet the proximity made my pulse stubbornly quicken. "Are you unharmed?" I asked, though the words were unnecessary. I already knew the answer. She would have been fine, and yet I could not stop myself from asking. "I am," she said, her voice steady and a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Thank you." I inclined my head slightly, unable to meet her gaze fully. Pride warned me not to linger on the sentiment, yet something unnameable urged me forward. I wanted to see her safe. I wanted to ensure her comfort. I wanted her attention, her trust, perhaps even more. Later, alone in my chambers, I reflected on the encounter, the thrill of confrontation, the need to protect her, and the sharp pull of admiration coursed through me, undeniable and relentless. She had sparked something that had long lain dormant, a yearning not for control, not for dominance, but for connection. And the realization was intoxicating and terrifying. I had seen her strength, her courage, and her fire. And I knew, with a certainty that unsettled me, that I would not be able to ignore it. She had become a presence in my life I had not anticipated, and the thought of losing her, even to trivial harm, was unbearable. Something was changing within me, slowly, dangerously, and I welcomed it, even as I feared what it meant. Chapter 10. Deliberate Shadows. The day had settled into a predictable rhythm, but my thoughts were anything but routine. I had spent the morning walking the courtyard, ostensibly inspecting the pack's activities, yet every glance, every step brought me closer to her. I did not admit it aloud, not even to myself, but her presence had begun to occupy the spaces in my mind I had long convinced were mine alone. I had learned early in life that control was everything. Authority was measured by how little you allowed yourself to be swayed by others, how unshakable your resolve appeared. And yet, here she was, shifting that balance without so much as a word, a glance, a smile, a posture that spoke of resilience and quiet courage. I found myself orchestrating moments, small ones, subtle ones, where our paths would cross. A book left carelessly near the fountain, a misplaced basket of supplies I happened to retrieve, an offer of guidance delivered with all the appearance of casual oversight. I watched her handle each with grace, the faintest smile brushing her lips at the smallest of gestures. It was intoxicating. Pride warred with desire. I reminded myself that I could not afford weakness, that attachment was dangerous. Yet every choice I made to remain near her, to protect her in ways unseen, deepened the pull. It was not authority that compelled me. It was fascination, admiration, and the subtle, undeniable stirrings of affection. She did not seem aware of the extent of my attention, though I suspected otherwise. The faint lift of her brow when our gazes met, the quiet assurance in the way she navigated the courtyard, hinted at awareness. And that only heightened the tension, the unspoken dialogue between us. I wanted her to see me, to understand that she mattered. But not yet. Not until I had tested my own restraint. By the afternoon, I found myself leaning against the hall's shadowed archway, watching her interact with the younger pack members. She corrected mistakes with a patience that bordered on maternal. Yet there was no condescension. Every gesture, every word, spoke of authority tempered by compassion. And I, the alpha, the ruler of this hall, felt a strange warmth bloom in my chest, a dangerous, reckless sensation I had long denied myself. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the courtyard, and I remained unseen, silent, deliberate. I had no intention of making my presence known today. This was not about dominance. This was about connection, about the subtle acknowledgement that I would be there, watching, ensuring she was safe without demanding recognition or gratitude. And yet I could not stop the small, unbidden thought that clung to the edges of my mind. I wanted more. Not just her safety, but her attention, her trust, perhaps even her affection, though I would not name it aloud. She moved like a quiet fire through the world, and I, drawn to it against every instinct of control, could do nothing but follow in deliberate shadows, consumed by fascination, pride, and the unspoken desire that had taken root deep within me. For the first time in years, I feared not an enemy, not failure, but the possibility of losing her, not to the world, but to her own independence and to the growing storm within me. Chapter 11. The Stirring of Desire. The halls were quieter than usual, the midday sun casting stark lines across the stone floors. I had been pacing for what felt like hours, my mind restless with thoughts of her. It was no longer mere curiosity, no longer simple admiration. Each glance, each small interaction had woven a thread into my consciousness, a thread I could neither control nor ignore. I caught sight of her from the shadows, moving with that quiet determination that both frustrated and fascinated me. She had no idea I was watching, yet every motion, every gesture seemed to pull at something deep within me. A dangerous, unrelenting pull that whispered of desire, of longing, of a connection I had spent years denying myself. I tried to suppress it, to remind myself of the rules I had lived by for so long. Alphas did not allow themselves to care. They did not allow vulnerability. And yet, I found myself thinking of her when I was alone, imagining the curve of her smile, the tilt of her head, the subtle strength in her gaze. A minor scuffle near the outer gates drew my attention, but this time my response was different. I did not intervene merely to maintain authority. I moved with deliberate speed, driven by something far more personal. The thought of her in danger, even briefly, ignited a protective fire I could not contain. By the time I reached the scene, the situation had been resolved without my interference, but my heart still pounded with an unfamiliar rhythm. I realized, with a clarity that both startled and unsettled me, that her presence had become essential, not to my reputation, not to my authority, but to my own sense of being. Later, in the quiet of my chambers, I allowed myself a dangerous indulgence. The thought of speaking to her, of closing the distance that had always separated us. Pride, training, the unyielding rules of my world, all screamed against it. And yet, the pull of fascination, of desire, was undeniable. I poured a cup of wine, bitter and strong, but it did little to steady the warmth that had settled in my chest. I realized, with a sinking sense of inevitability, that I no longer simply observed her. I wanted her attention. I wanted her trust. Perhaps in ways I dared not name, I wanted her affection. This realization was both intoxicating and terrifying. It meant vulnerability. It meant risk. It meant the possibility of losing control over the one thing I had always believed untouchable: my heart. And yet, despite the fear, I welcomed it. I had never known this pull before, this stirring of desire so profound that it shook the foundations of everything I had built. She had crossed a line I had thought impervious, and I could not, would not, pretend it had not happened. The fire within me was dangerous, reckless, and entirely consuming. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and unsettled me, that there was no turning back. She had claimed a part of me, silently and irrevocably. Chapter 12. Deliberate Proximity. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the surrounding woods. Yet my thoughts were far from the weather. They were on her, always her. I had spent days in subtle observation, in careful planning, arranging moments that allowed me to remain near without overt intrusion. But today felt different. Today demanded more. I positioned myself along the route she often took through the courtyard, ostensibly to inspect the day's work, though the truth was far less formal. My eyes followed her movements, noting how she carried herself, how she interacted with others. Every detail etched itself into my memory. I had long prided myself on control, on discipline, but she was undoing that with every careful step. A young pack member stumbled near her, dropping a basket of provisions. Without hesitation, she moved to steady the situation, bending to gather the scattered items with patience and quiet authority. I stepped forward ostensibly by chance and offered my assistance. She glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and for a moment, I wondered if she knew how deliberately I had placed myself in her path. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting my help without hesitation. There was no awe in her eyes, no deference forced by my rank. Just acknowledgement, quiet and genuine. I felt a thrill at the simplicity of it, at the subtle recognition that we were, in some unspoken way, crossing the boundary that had always kept us apart. We moved together through the courtyard, our actions synchronized almost effortlessly. I caught the faintest glimmer of curiosity in her gaze, a spark that mirrored my own fascination. I wanted to speak, to let her know that I had been watching, that I cared, not merely as an alpha, but as a man who had found something in her that unsettled and captivated him. Yet pride kept my words restrained, my tone measured, controlled. Every small interaction, every shared glance, heightened the tension between us. I felt the pull of her presence, a magnetism that tugged at my chest with a force I could not resist. She was unaware of the effect she had on me, and perhaps that was for the best. I needed her to remain unguarded, to see her authentic self, even as I navigated the dangerous territory of my own burgeoning emotions. By the afternoon, I found myself lingering near her, creating opportunities to cross paths under the guise of oversight. Each encounter, each subtle exchange, reinforced the magnetic draw between us. She was becoming a constant in my thoughts, a presence I could not ignore. And yet, for all the control I had once believed immutable, I realized with an undeniable clarity, I was willingly letting her occupy the spaces in my mind, my heart, my life. The desire to protect, to observe, to remain close, it was no longer subtle. It was a pull I could not resist. She was changing everything, quietly, irreversibly. And I, stubborn alpha that I was, found myself powerless to resist. Chapter 13. A Quiet Confession. The evening air was soft, carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth from the surrounding forests. The hall was quieter than usual, the bustle of the day fading into the shadows. And there she was, seated near the fountain, the last light of the sun glinting off the water, casting a glow across her features that I could not look away from. I approached, deliberately slow, wanting her to sense my presence without startling her. She glanced up, meeting my eyes with a faint, curious smile. It was enough to send a jolt through me, a mix of anticipation, admiration, and something far more dangerous. Longing. "Evening," I said, my voice low and steady, though my pulse betrayed me. "Evening, Alpha," she replied, her tone polite yet not distant. There was a warmth there, subtle but undeniable, and it drew me closer than I intended. We were silent for a moment, the world around us fading. No pack members, no duties, only the soft ripple of water and the steady beat of my own heart. I realized with a sharp clarity that I wanted to hear her speak, not because I commanded it, but because I wanted to know her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. I wanted to ask, I began cautiously, testing the fragile boundaries I had begun to cross. "If you are well, Not in the way one asks a subordinate, but truly. The words felt strange leaving my lips, alien to the formality I had always relied upon, yet necessary. She tilted her head, curiosity in her gaze. "I am," she said softly, and then, after a pause, "For the most part, the day has been easier than I expected." Her smile was small, genuine, and it reached her eyes, lighting them in a way that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I found myself moving closer, drawn by the gravity of her presence, careful not to overstep, careful not to betray the walls of pride that still lingered. "You carry yourself well," I said, the words tasting unfamiliar, but true. "Even when faced with difficulty, you remain steady." She looked at me, a flicker of something unspoken passing between us, a shared acknowledgement, a recognition of effort, perhaps even understanding. "I've had to learn," she replied quietly. "Life doesn't offer many pauses. One must move forward, even when uncertain." Her words struck a chord I had long thought silenced. I realized that what drew me to her was not just her courage, but her strength tempered by gentleness. It was a force that demanded admiration, and, dangerously, it demanded my care. For the first time, I allowed myself a rare confession, though silent, internal. She had claimed a space in my heart, unbidden, irrevocable. I wanted her to see me, to know me, not as Alpha, but as someone who had begun to feel in ways I had denied for years. And in that quiet moment by the fountain's edge, I understood that our paths were no longer separate. They were intertwined, subtly, irrevocably, and I would not let that thread break. Chapter 14. Unseen Guardianship. The morning mist clung to the courtyard, softening the harsh lines of stone and shadow. I stood in the watchtower, ostensibly surveying the area for any disturbances, though my attention was drawn, as always, to her. She moved with her usual quiet grace, carrying out her morning tasks, her focus entirely on the world around her. Yet every movement, every subtle glance, reminded me why I could not look away. It began with small interventions. A precariously stacked basket of supplies here, a loose stone there. I would appear, always at the edge of notice, steadying what might have fallen, keeping her unaware of the hazards she had not yet sensed. Pride dictated that my actions remain unseen, my influence indirect, but my heart, dangerously alive, urged me to ensure she was safe. She caught my shadow once, briefly, and our eyes met. The slightest lift of her brow betrayed neither fear nor submission, only acknowledgement. That small gesture, subtle and unassuming, sparked something deep within me. Admiration entwined with desire, a quiet obsession I could neither deny nor control. Later, as she made her way toward the outer gate, I followed at a careful distance. A group of younger pack members approached, their mischief evident in their posture and smirks. I did not intervene immediately. Instead, I observed, assessing, calculating the precise moment my presence would matter most. It was a dangerous thrill, this feeling of anticipation, the subtle dance of protection, the need to act without revealing the depth of my care. When one of them tried to block her path, I stepped forward decisively. My shadow fell across the ground like a living barrier, my voice cutting through the morning air with calm authority. "Move aside." The surprise in their eyes was immediate, and they parted without hesitation. She had not faltered, her gaze steady, but when it met mine, there was a flicker of something I could not name. Gratitude, recognition, perhaps even trust. It was enough to send a warmth through me I could not contain. Later, alone in the hall, I replayed the events, reflecting on the strange tension that had taken hold within me. Every instinct screamed to maintain distance, to uphold pride, to avoid attachment. And yet, every glance, every subtle interaction, drew me closer. I wanted her safe. Not out of duty, not out of expectation, but because her presence had become essential to me. I poured myself a cup of wine, tasting its bitterness yet feeling none of its usual effect. My mind lingered on her posture, her calm, her courage, her small smile when our eyes met. I hated that I was so affected, that her simple existence unsettled the foundations of my carefully ordered life. And yet I welcomed it, desperately, willingly. For the first time in years, I realized that protection was no longer merely responsibility. It was desire, it was fascination, it was the subtle, consuming pull of something I had long denied myself, care for another untainted by duty or status. She had become the axis of my attention, and I was powerless to resist the gravity of her presence. Chapter 15. The Edge of Closeness. The late afternoon sun stretched shadows across the courtyard, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. I found myself lingering near the fountain, pretending to inspect the stonework, though my attention was entirely on her. She moved with that familiar, quiet confidence, her hands arranging flowers brought in from the gardens, her face calm, serene. I stepped closer, more deliberately this time, ensuring my presence would be felt without startling her. She glanced up and our eyes met. That brief connection sent a ripple through me, a dangerous pull I could not resist. I had been careful until now, maintaining distance, guarding my emotions, but the sight of her here so close made restraint nearly impossible. "Your hands are gentle," I said, the words low, almost a murmur, but meant to carry across the small space between us. "Even in work, there is a certain carefulness. It is admirable." She looked up fully then, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "I do what I can," she replied softly, her tone unassuming yet filled with quiet pride. "One must tend to what matters, even if it seems small." The simplicity of her words struck me. Here she was, an omega of little influence in the pack, speaking with a confidence and dignity that few could claim. I felt a tightening in my chest, a pull I could neither name nor resist. My pride demanded that I remain aloof, that I maintain control, yet every instinct in me urged proximity, connection, something closer than mere observation. I moved another step nearer, careful not to crowd her, yet close enough that she could feel the warmth of my presence. She did not flinch. She did not avert her eyes. Instead, she continued her work, glancing at me from time to time with a subtle acknowledgement that set my heart racing. For a moment, silence stretched between us, a charged, intimate quiet that spoke louder than words. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to bridge the distance that etiquette and pride had forced us to maintain. And yet, I held back, letting the tension linger, savoring the moment of closeness without overstepping. "Do you often come here alone?" I asked, careful, controlled, yet tinged with curiosity. "Sometimes," she replied, glancing at me with a faint smile. "It is quiet, and one can think, and it is a place where the world does not press as heavily." I nodded, understanding more than I should have allowed. In that quiet moment, standing just beyond the space where she could feel threatened, I realized that this closeness, this shared silence, was becoming as vital to me as air or blood. I wanted more. I wanted to know her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. I wanted to exist, if only briefly, within the orbit of her life. And for the first time, I acknowledged it fully, inwardly, without disguise. She had become more than a fascination. She had become a necessity, a pull I could not resist, and a quiet ache I welcomed with every fiber of my being. Chapter 16. Shared Solitude. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth from the nearby gardens. I found her at the edge of the courtyard, seated on a stone bench, quietly sketching something in the small notebook she always carried. The world around us had faded into soft shadows, and for a moment I simply watched. She looked unguarded here, serene, her focus entirely on the paper in her hands. I approached slowly, careful not to startle her, but this time, my steps carried a deliberate intimacy. She sensed me before I spoke, looking up with a small, calm smile. That smile, subtle yet disarming, stirred something deep within me, a pull I could no longer ignore or disguise. "You always find the quietest spots," I said, my voice low, almost hesitant. "And yet, it seems you are never alone, not truly. Your presence carries its own gravity." Her eyes flicked to mine, a hint of curiosity mixed with amusement. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "but it is easier when one can choose the company." Her words were light, yet I felt their weight. She did not need me, yet she welcomed it. She did not seek protection, yet she allowed my presence. That subtle trust was dangerous, intoxicating. I sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, yet close enough that our shadows merged with the fading light. We spoke little at first, sharing the silence, the easy comfort of simply existing in the same space. And in that silence, I felt the undeniable truth. This was more than admiration or fascination. This was a connection, raw and unspoken, stretching between us in a fragile but potent thread. She glanced at me, then back at her notebook. "Do you ever sit and simply watch?" she asked quietly. "Not as an alpha commanding attention, but as a person noticing?" I considered her question, the edge of vulnerability in her tone. "Rarely," I admitted, my voice betraying a hint of something I rarely allowed: honesty. "But I find that some things, some people, are worth observing, worth noticing, truly noticing." Her smile deepened, softer now, and I felt warmth spread through me. Not the warmth of desire alone, but of recognition, of shared understanding. She had acknowledged me as more than authority, more than shadow and presence. She had recognized the part of me that cared, that admired, that wanted. The evening stretched on, our conversation light yet meaningful, punctuated by quiet laughter and shared glances. In those hours, I realized the depth of my attachment, the dangerous pull of my emotions, and the undeniable truth. I was irrevocably drawn to her. Not for duty, not for power, not for control, but for her. And in that quiet solitude, I allowed myself, for the first time in years, to hope that perhaps she felt the same. Chapter 17. The Reckoning. Within the hall was quiet, the late afternoon sun filtering through tall windows and casting long golden slashes across the stone floor. I stood near the edge, staring down at the courtyard below, yet my mind was elsewhere. Thoughts of her, her quiet strength, her unwavering calm, the subtle pull she had over me, consumed me entirely. I had spent weeks observing her, protecting her in ways unseen, cherishing even the smallest shared moments. Yet tonight, the weight of my feelings pressed upon me with a force I could no longer ignore. Pride, training, the unyielding rules of my world, they all whispered that attachment was weakness. And yet, weakness had never felt so necessary, so vital. I found myself pacing, each step echoing through the empty hall. She had become a constant in my thoughts, a presence I could neither evade nor deny. Her laughter, her careful movements, the soft tilt of her head, every detail haunted me, tugging at something I had long suppressed. I recalled the quiet moments we had shared by the fountain, the soft smiles, the unspoken trust. Each encounter had been a thread, weaving a connection that grew stronger, more undeniable with every passing day. And now, standing alone, I could not escape the truth. I cared. Deeply. Dangerously. Inevitably. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had built my life on control, on authority, on distance. And yet here she was, unraveling those walls with a single glance, a single gesture, a single quiet presence. I hated that I was affected, that she had this power over me. And yet, I welcomed it. I allowed myself to speak aloud, a confession for no one but myself. "I care," I admitted, voice low, almost reverent. I cannot deny it any longer." The words lingered in the hall, swallowed only by the silence. I thought of the moments yet to come, the walks through the courtyard, the shared quiet, the subtle exchanges of trust and understanding. I realized that I wanted more than observation. I wanted closeness, presence, a connection beyond silent admiration. I wanted her in a way that was dangerous and intoxicating, a way that defied my carefully constructed rules. And yet, despite the fear, the uncertainty, the risk of vulnerability, I knew I could not turn back. She had become the axis of my thoughts, the anchor to my emotions, the one presence that stirred something raw and unyielding within me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to embrace the truth. I would no longer deny the pull, the fascination, the dangerous longing that had taken root in my chest. She was no longer just an observer in my life. She was essential, indispensable, and I was irrevocably drawn to her. The hall remained silent, but within me a storm had settled, and I knew with unwavering certainty that my life had shifted. There was no going back. Chapter 18: Crossing the Quiet Line. The evening was settling into a gentle dusk, and the courtyard was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. I had chosen to linger, pretending to inspect the stonework along the walkways, though my attention was entirely on her. She moved among the younger pack members, offering quiet guidance, her calm confidence evident in every gesture. I stepped closer, letting my presence be noticed this time. Not hidden, not distant, but deliberate. She paused mid-motion and turned toward me, curiosity flickering across her features. My chest tightened. I had never approached her like this, not with intention so bold, so deliberate, yet necessary. "You've been working hard today," I said, low and steady. "Even in the smallest tasks, your attention, it draws notice." My words carried more than observation. They carried intent, something I had long denied myself. She looked at me, eyes wide for a heartbeat, then softened with a gentle smile. I try," she replied, her voice calm, yet there was an acknowledgement there, subtle, unspoken. It was as if she understood the weight behind my words, though she could not fully see it. I stepped a little closer, careful to respect her space, yet close enough that the warmth of my presence brushed against hers. "It does not go unnoticed," I murmured, and I could see the faintest flicker of something in her gaze, a recognition, a quiet acceptance of my attention. For a moment we existed in that shared space, silence stretched between us, rich with unspoken meaning. The world beyond the courtyard seemed to vanish, leaving only the pull between us, the subtle energy that had grown over weeks of observation, protection, and quiet admiration. "You always seem near," she said softly, almost a whisper, "even when I do not realize it." Her words were careful, yet they carried a vulnerability I had never expected to see. I felt it, deeply, in the tightening of my chest, the surge of protective instinct that had become impossible to ignore. "I am," I admitted, my voice low, deliberate, almost reverent. "Not out of duty, but because I choose to be." The words hung between us, charged, dangerous, intimate. I could see her processing, weighing the meaning, the sincerity, the quiet power behind them. She nodded slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that this, our closeness, our growing bond, was no longer accidental, no longer tentative. It was deliberate, mutual in its own subtle way. The lantern light flickered, shadows dancing across the courtyard, and I realized that the distance I had maintained so carefully was dissolving. I wanted her closer, not for appearances, not for pride, not for control, but for her, for the warmth, the presence, the quiet fire that had claimed my attention and refused to release it. And as I stood there, deliberate, bold, yet still careful. I knew we were crossing a line I had long feared but could no longer avoid. Chapter 19. Unspoken Confessions. The courtyard was quiet that evening, the moon casting silver light across the stone pathways. I had found her near the fountain again, her fingers tracing the surface of the water as though following some private rhythm. I stopped a short distance away, watching, my chest tight with emotions I could no longer contain. Weeks of observation, of silent protection, of deliberate closeness, had brought me to this point. I could no longer remain at a distance, no longer pretend that my fascination, my attachment, was merely admiration. Every glance, every shared moment, had woven her presence into the core of me. I stepped closer, my movements slow, purposeful, ensuring she felt my presence without fear. She looked up at the sound of my approach, her eyes meeting mine. For a heartbeat, silence held us in its grip, electric, tense, intimate. "I cannot hide it any longer," I said, my voice low, deliberate, almost trembling. You have become essential to me. Not because you need protection, not because duty demands it, but because I choose it. Because I cannot bear to be apart from you, even for a moment. Her gaze widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features, but she did not step back. She met my eyes, steady, calm, yet the warmth there betrayed her awareness. I could see it in the slight tilt of her head, the softness of her expression, the quiet acknowledgement of the truth I had laid bare. I did not know," she said softly, her voice careful yet open, "that you felt so strongly." I swallowed, the weight of my own admission settling heavily in my chest. "I do. Strongly. And it has grown, quietly, irreversibly. I have tried to restrain it, to maintain my distance, but I cannot. You have claimed more of me than I can ever ignore." The faintest smile curved her lips, tentative, almost shy, yet luminous. "I feel it too," she whispered, and my heart thumped with a mixture of relief, desire, and awe. "Your presence, it has always been important." We stood together, close now, shadows mingling in the moonlight, and I realized that our slow, deliberate steps toward each other had reached a moment of undeniable truth. The air between us was charged, electric, filled with the unspoken promises of care, trust, and something more profound. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what could follow, not duty, not propriety, not authority, but a connection built on choice, respect, and the quiet pull of our hearts toward one another. And in that moment, standing before her, I knew one thing with certainty: the walls I had built around my heart were gone. She had crossed them, not with force, but with courage, patience, and the slow, undeniable magnetism of her presence. And I welcomed it, completely. Chapter 20. The Quiet Bond. The morning sun spilled over the courtyard, painting the stone paths with warmth. I found her seated near the fountain, sketchbook in hand, though she had not yet begun to draw. Instead, she watched the water ripple, lost in thought. I approached, careful but deliberate, my heart steady despite the anticipation that churned within me. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm, yet carrying a softness I rarely allowed myself to display. She looked up, meeting my gaze with a quiet smile. "Good morning, Alpha," she replied, though her tone held no formality, only familiarity. That small shift, the subtle erosion of distance, sent a warmth through me that I could not suppress. I sat beside her, close enough to share the space but careful not to crowd her. Silence fell between us, comfortable and deliberate, an intimacy neither of us needed to announce. In that quiet, I realized the depth of the bond forming between us, built not on authority, not on duty, but on trust, mutual respect, and shared understanding. "Did you sleep well?" I asked after a moment, testing the fragile openness I had begun to cultivate. Her gaze flicked to mine, thoughtful. Better than I have in some time, she admitted softly. I feel safer knowing you are near. It is reassuring. I felt a shiver of satisfaction, tempered by an awareness that this was no small confession for her. She had entrusted me with her vulnerability, and in doing so, she had deepened the invisible threads that now bound us together. I want you to know, I said, my voice low and deliberate, that it is my choice to be near you, not because of rank, not because it is expected, but because I care, because I value your safety, your happiness, and your presence. She turned slightly to face me more fully, her eyes searching mine with a mixture of curiosity and trust. I feel the same, she whispered. It matters to me too, that you are near, that you notice, that you care. Our hands brushed lightly, a fleeting touch that carried more weight than words ever could. It was deliberate, intimate, yet gentle, a symbol of trust, connection, and the beginning of something deeper. I felt the pull of her presence, stronger than ever, and allowed myself to relax into it, to savor the quiet bond that had been formed through patience, observation, and slow revelation. We remained there for some time, sharing silence, conversation, and the warmth of mutual understanding. Each glance, each subtle movement, strengthened the tether between us, creating a foundation for what could grow. I realized then that this bond, fragile, delicate, yet unbreakable in its own way, was the true prize of my obsession, fascination, and care. And in that shared solitude, I understood that we had begun to build something lasting, a connection grounded in trust, choice, and the quiet recognition that for the first time in both our lives, we could be more than we had been alone. Chapter 21. The Moment. Between the evening settled over the courtyard like a soft, velvety blanket. Lanterns flickered, casting pools of light across the cobblestones. I found her seated on the edge of the fountain, her eyes reflecting the golden glow, lost in quiet thought. The air between us was electric, charged with the familiarity of countless shared moments and the anticipation of something more. I approached slowly, careful to let her feel my presence without intrusion. She looked up as I drew near, and for a heartbeat, our eyes locked. That quiet intensity, the pull of unspoken emotions, filled the space between us. I knew in that instant that this was a moment that could not be ignored, a moment that demanded honesty, courage, and choice. I began, my voice low, steady despite the storm of emotion within me. I cannot pretend anymore. All the careful observation, the deliberate proximity, it was not just fascination. It was... I paused, searching her face, trying to gauge her readiness. It is... love. I care for you. More than I have allowed myself to admit, even to myself. Her breath caught slightly, and the faintest flush colored her cheeks. She did not step back. Instead, she met my gaze fully, her expression open, vulnerable, yet unafraid. I care for you too, she admitted softly. I have felt it for some time, though I did not know how to say it. The words struck me with a force that left me momentarily speechless. Years of pride, control, and unyielding discipline had prepared me for many challenges, but never for this. The raw, unguarded connection of mutual confession. My chest ached with relief, desire, and a fierce protective need all at once. I stepped closer, deliberate but cautious, my hand brushing hers lightly, testing the boundaries of our newfound intimacy. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into the touch, her presence grounding me, igniting something within me I could no longer resist. This changes everything, I whispered, my forehead resting near hers, our breaths mingling in the cool night air. I do not want to be without you, not as Alpha, not as anything but as someone who needs you. Her smile was quiet, tentative, yet filled with warmth and affirmation. Nor do I, she replied. I trust you, and I want to be with you. Not because you command it, not because the world expects it, but because we choose it." In that instant, the tension that had hovered between us for weeks dissolved, replaced by a bond forged through honesty, trust, and the deliberate choice to embrace one another. We sat together by the fountain, hands entwined, hearts aligned, and the world around us seemed to fade away. For the first time, I allowed myself to hope, not for duty, not for control, not for appearances, but for love. Real, mutual, undeniable love. Chapter 22. The First Days. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long beams across the hall. I found her in the courtyard, gathering herbs for the pack stores. The casual ease with which she moved struck me anew, so familiar yet now colored by the knowledge that she belonged to me in a way neither protocol nor rank could define. I approached silently, letting my presence announce itself naturally. She glanced up, and her smile, warm, unguarded, made my chest tighten with a quiet ache of happiness. For the first time, I could greet her without restraint, without the careful armor of distance I had once maintained. "Good morning," I said, deliberately soft. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, her expression tender. "Better than ever. Knowing you are near, it makes a difference." Her words were simple, yet their weight carried far more than mere pleasantries. We walked together through the courtyard side by side, the casual brushing of our shoulders a small yet potent reminder of our closeness. I found myself deliberately creating these moments, guiding our interactions without overstepping, ensuring she felt the care and attention I longed to give. Later, we shared quiet conversation in the hall, discussing mundane tasks and small curiosities of the day. There was laughter, gentle teasing, and the soft comfort of shared presence. I realized that romance, true and deliberate, was not in grand gestures alone. It was in these subtle exchanges, the weaving of daily life into a shared tapestry. Yet even in these tender moments, the weight of societal expectations lingered. The pack's eyes, the whispers of tradition, the unspoken rules of rank, these forces pressed against our intimacy, reminding me that our connection, though chosen, existed in delicate balance. I could not shield her entirely from scrutiny, nor would I try. Instead, I chose honesty, subtlety, and deliberate attention, trusting in the strength of what we shared. That evening, as we lingered by the fountain, her hand found mine naturally, a simple gesture that carried profound meaning. The warmth of her touch, the steadying rhythm of her presence, reminded me why all the caution, all the patience had been worth it. "I want this," I admitted, voice low, almost reverent. "I want us, fully, despite the world, despite the expectations. Because you matter more than any rule, any protocol, any pride I've held." She squeezed my hand gently, her smile soft but certain. "And I want it too. Because you are more than authority or rank. You are you. And I trust that we can find our path together." For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where we existed together, not merely in stolen moments, but openly, intentionally, bound by trust, affection, and choice. And in that quiet certainty, the bonds of romance strengthened, deepening the slow-burn love that had begun so subtly and now burned with purpose. Chapter 23. Trials of Trust. The courtyard was bathed in the muted light of late afternoon, shadows stretching long across the stone pathways. I had noticed her hesitation earlier, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to stir the protector in me. Something weighed on her mind, and I could not ignore it. I approached, careful yet purposeful. She looked up as I drew near, and our eyes met. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her gaze, a subtle tremor I had not seen before. My chest tightened. I hated that she felt this weight alone, hated that I could not shield her from every worry. Yet I also knew that trust meant letting her carry some burdens with me at her side. "You've been quiet today," I observed, keeping my voice calm but deliberate. "What troubles you?" She hesitated, glancing away toward the edge of the gardens. "It is nothing you need to concern yourself with," she murmured, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her words. I stepped closer, gently taking her hand in mine. The warmth of her touch, the familiar weight of her trust, grounded me. "Everything concerns me when it concerns you," I said softly. "We share more than proximity, more than fleeting moments. If there is worry, you do not carry it alone." Her gaze met mine then, a mixture of vulnerability and relief, and I felt the fragile bond between us strengthen with that silent acknowledgement. Slowly she spoke, revealing the quiet challenge that had been troubling her, a worry about fulfilling her role in the pack, about doing right by herself and those who depended on her. I listened carefully, allowing her words to fall into place, letting her know without speaking that I was there, that I understood, that I trusted her strength. When she finished, the silence between us was heavy, intimate, charged with unspoken emotion. I tightened my hold gently, leaning close. "You are stronger than you realize," I murmured, "and you do not have to face these burdens alone. I am here, always." A small, unguarded smile curved her lips. I believe you," she whispered. In that single phrase, the weight she had carried seemed lighter, her trust in me absolute. And I realized fully that our connection had grown beyond admiration, beyond desire. It was now anchored in mutual reliance, respect, and an unwavering bond. We lingered by the fountain, hand in hand, sharing quiet moments of acknowledgement, our breaths and heartbeats aligned. The challenge had tested us, not in conflict, not in fear, but in trust, and we had emerged stronger, closer, more committed. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine that no obstacle, no expectation, no scrutiny could undo what we had built. We had chosen each other, and that choice, deliberate and unyielding, had solidified our connection in a way nothing else could. And in the quiet of that shared understanding, I knew that love, true, steadfast, and deliberate, had found its place between us, unshakable and absolute. Chapter 24. Forever by your side. The morning sun rose over the castle ramparts, spilling golden light across the courtyard and illuminating the world in warmth. I found her standing at the edge of the fountain, the water glinting in the sunlight, her expression serene and thoughtful. The sight of her filled me with a sense of peace I had never known. Calm, steady, and yet electric, as if she alone could anchor the storm within me. I approached without hesitation, every step deliberate, every heartbeat aligned with the quiet certainty that she was mine, not in possession, but in trust and choice. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, the distance we had maintained for so long, the careful walls, the tentative exchanges, all dissolved. "Good morning," I said softly, my voice carrying the weight of countless unspoken words, of long weeks of observation, care, and growing admiration. She smiled, that gentle, unguarded smile that had always undone me, and stepped closer. "Good morning," she replied, her hand brushing against mine with a familiarity that had become our new normal. I took her hand fully, holding it with the deliberate intent of someone who knew what they had found and refused to let go. I've spent so long watching, waiting, wondering if I could ever allow myself to feel this, I admitted, voice low, reverent. And now I know. I want to stand by your side. Always. Her fingers tightened around mine, warmth flowing through that small contact, grounding me. "I want that too," she whispered. "I've chosen it, every day, every quiet moment we've shared. I trust you. I care for you. I love you." The words struck me with a force I could no longer contain. I stepped closer, brushing my forehead against hers, breathing in the familiar scent of her, the quiet intimacy we had built over weeks of connection, trust, and careful observation. "Then it is settled," I murmured. You and I, we are together. Not because of rank, or duty, or expectation, but because we choose each other. Always. Her smile deepened, eyes shining with warmth, and I knew in that moment that our bond was unshakable. We had faced silence, hesitation, subtle tests of trust, and the slow burn of longing. And now, we had reached the point where nothing could undo what we had built. We lingered there hand in hand, letting the morning sun wash over us, the courtyard around us alive with possibility and promise. There was no rush, no need for grand declarations beyond what had already been said. Our hearts had spoken, our trust had been proven, and our love had solidified into something lasting, deliberate, and complete. And as we stood together, shadows and sunlight mingling across the fountain's surface, I knew one undeniable truth. She was my chosen, and I hers, forever by her side.